Hi, I'm Robert Rodriguez, and this is my MOC for the Battle of Ammunition Hill in 1967. What this is a depiction of a battle that occurred during the Six-Day War between the Arabs and the Israelis. And what this is Ammunition Hill, which is just north of the center of Jerusalem. What I'm depicting is the Battle of the Trenches. What Ammunition Hill was literally a hill with ammunition. The British in World War II had occupied this area and stored ammunition, and it stayed that way all the way up through the 1960s. And so when the British left, it was left open to the Jordanians, and that's who's depicted on here, but the Jordanians occupied it and made trenches all the way around the hill. And so what they did was, it was a defendable place. It was also high, because it had a commanding view of all the area. The reasons the Israelis wanted it was because as you're looking at it, you're facing east. What the MOC is actually facing west. But east of this of the hill was the Hebrew University, and it was maybe a couple of miles away. The Israelis needed to go and capture take over the Hebrew University, because there were Jewish population that they needed to protect. And so initially the Israelis thought, we'll just bypass it and worry about it later, because they were pressed for time. By this time, the Israelis had air control, so they weren't worried about air attacks or anything like that. But then the decision was made, we need to take the hill. So what happened was, they decided to surround it and then make a strike on there. And there was a lot of casualties, unfortunately. And there's two casualties that I will point out in the MOC that are pretty significant to the story. What you see in front of you is the last line of trenches in front of the buildings, or in front of the bunker, and in front of the water tower. And I do have a side story on the water tower. But here you see, over here on your right, you see an Israeli charging the bunkers, or charging the trenches, and you'll see a blood trail. There was a commander, I think he was the captain, had to order one of his privates to get out of the trenches that they were in and actually attack the next line of trenches. But he told the private that if you do this, you're going to die. And the private said, if I don't do this, we'll all die. So he went and sacrificed himself. When they found him later, they started counting the bullets in his body. They stopped at 18. But his distraction led to the other soldiers moving into the other side of the trenches, and to start moving into the trenches. So you'll see that they're moving in there. The way the trenches were, they were also very narrow. Two men standing side by side couldn't go through there. So imagine machine gun fire going through all this stuff, and people not being able to go side to side and dodging it. So I think there was like 75 paratroopers, all but like 6 were wounded or killed. And thankfully for the Israelis, they were able to capture the bunker system by destroying the command bunker. And so what I have depicted here are the Israeli soldiers in their gear and rifles and such. A lot of their gear were secondhand from the British, also from various sources, the Americans, etc. But the Americans didn't support Israel. The Israelis got a lot of equipment secondhand through other sources, but they had like American equipment and stuff like that. The Jordanians, on the other hand, they were really British soldiers dressed, or they were just dressed in British equipment, had British weapons, tanks, etc. So what I have here is I have them in traditional headdress for the Jordanians, but you can see they're also carrying American weapons, etc. And then, so that's what this is depicting. The water tower, the reason I have an interesting story about the water tower was, in all the source material from YouTube, I watched a lot of videos on the Six-Day War, and none of them really mentioned the water tower. So I didn't know what that was. I didn't know, was it a bunker or was it an observation tower? What? It never said. I was on a Google or something like that, and I saw a photograph of a gentleman on tour, And the wife said, "This is my husband in front of the water tower." So that's how I knew it was a water tower. As I mentioned, you're looking at it facing east. To the west, about 100 yards today, is now a high school. That's how things have changed. To the south of it, there's a mall and apartments and all that kind of stuff. So it's amazing to know that this had a serious battle with serious consequences, and now it's more of a memorial now. In fact, because paratroopers took the hill, a lot of paratroopers that are inducted into the Army, that's where they take their oath. Also, what's fascinating is that the Israelis in their military college do not study this battle. The reason being is that they felt that this battle was so impossible, and they were extremely lucky and blessed, so to speak, that they were able to take the hill. There was no point in studying it because it was impossible.
They almost feel they couldn't ever repeat it.
Right. And so why bother studying it? And they document it in history, but they don't even study it. They just say it happened, and there you go.
So what led you to creating kind of this particular battle and kind of your interest in this period of military history? Because you don't see a lot of Lego builds based on, this sort of time period in these battles.
Well, I've always been fascinated with the Arab-Israeli conflicts, even from the beginning of the time, like from 1948 all the way to the present. But what fascinated me the most was the Six-Day War, on how quickly things transpired. The first day, the Israelis knocked out the air forces from Egypt and Syria, and I believe Jordan later on in the day. In fact, this attack occurred like on the second day, maybe the third day. My history is a little off and such, but the reason they did the attack so quickly was, the reason they did the attack so quickly was because with having air superiority, they didn't need the ground forces in Egypt, so they moved them to Jerusalem because Jerusalem was their number one objective, was to capture the city and take over the city, and that's what they did. Initially, when I started this MOC, I was wanting to do the Battle of Jerusalem itself and have a bigger display, but time-wise, I just didn't have the time, and I thought the Ammunition Hill battle was perfect. And as you can see, it's really thick on the base, and the reason I did that was because it's sloping up. If you notice how it's sloping up, so this trench here or this bunker here is lower than the bunker up top. Yeah.
What is the kind of public reaction when you display a build like this? Because you've displayed a number of military builds. We've featured some of your great work in the past. What do you typically get as public come by and kind of as people see these builds? What's their reaction like?
Well, they're fascinated more with like the details and stuff like that, but a lot of times they don't know the history because they don't study military history, and they just see a bunch of soldiers out there and like, oh, okay, that's cool. And but this year with the space on how we're set up and everything, I'm just not able to answer a lot of questions because I have other MOCs, of course, and they're asking about those and such. But I really wanted to do this, and I really wanted to get the story out, so I appreciate y'all interviewing me about that. It's just fascinating history.
Right. No, I love how interested and passionate you are about the history and then displaying that with Lego builds here. So thank you for taking us through the layout and for bringing it out to Brick Fiesta.
No worries. Thank you very much.